Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. Before I get into the video, there is a link in the description box to a GoFundMe for Allah and her family whilst they are stuck in Gaza, so if you can check that out, I'd really appreciate it. Today I'm going to do my October and mostly victober wrap up. Oh yeah, I knit this dress, so I hope you enjoy. Okay, so the first thing I actually read in October was the comic When I Arrived at the Castle by E.M. Carroll. Yeah, it's a sort of like gothic, horror-y comic, sapphic vampire kind of energy. It's pretty short and I really enjoyed it, but I felt like the ending just completely fizzled out, like it just fully just ended. And I didn't like that, and I feel like that was a real shame because I think it had great potential, and like I said, I really enjoyed it, and I really liked how one of the main characters is like chubbier, and I loved how her body was drawn, and that was like, I don't know, it made me really happy. There's like a scene where she's like in the bath and stuff, and I was like, oh, that's kind of like how my body looks, and yeah, so that was really nice. And I did really like the vibe and the energy. I just think it was yeah, failed a bit by the ending and how like abrupt it was. But if we like discount that, like yeah, it was a really excellent comic. So it made me read, I mean, I've wanted to read E.M. Carroll's work for a while since I like started hearing about it, especially this one because I love vampires and lesbianism, but yeah, I haven't for a long time, and so having read this, I definitely have wanted to read more. So yeah, that was some like, you know, October Halloween-y energy stuff going on, although also just, I guess, like an autumnal vibe that I am going for. The other book that I then read was a Victorian novel. That's Amy Furness Scholar by Catherine Bruce Glazer, or Catherine St. John Conway. The same person, it's just one is her married name and one is her unmarried name, and she went by both, but it seems like she published her fiction under Catherine St. John Conway, but people call her, yeah, anyway. So this was a novel that I spoke about in my Victorian socialist fiction video, so it's obviously in the vein of socialist Victorian politics. It's definitely an emphasis on Christian socialism. It's very much about the good qualities of Christian religion being hand in hand with socialist and socializing forces, basically, and sort of like thoughts and practices. I described it as very gay, which I think it is, but I guess it sort of spoils it, but it's quite a short one. I would say it's more like a novella than like a full-length novel. I'd say that Catherine St. John Conway, like her writing practice, especially with her fiction, was often about like encouraging more people to join in, especially women, join in with the socialist cause. So it makes sense in terms of her decision about like the main protagonist being like a particular kind of woman who is working, specifically she's a school teacher, and she's like middle class, and yeah, wow, I feel like I'm doing a really bad job here, but but because of the position that she exists in, she has like a little bit of mobility and fluidity and also autonomy over her life and the shape of her life, and as a result of that she can go. And then also there is like a real prioritization of education as like a foundational socialist practice. Obviously we have Amy Furness Scholar as the title, so it's clearly important, but it's never like sort of explicitly stated, but it's very clear. Like, and also like reading, the practice of reading is very important in the book. Yeah, like I don't know that I would really recommend this to lots of people. I think like the like queer aspect of it I obviously really enjoyed, but it is like a difficult story, and I think like if you are looking for like socialist politics in novels, like I wouldn't say this is especially great because of the way that it prioritizes like middle class people and sees working class women especially as sort of unlockers of middle class women's consciences, and you know, beings through which middle class women can act out like utopian and socialist desires in the world. So it doesn't feel like, yeah, working class women are like centered in the way that they should be. There's also some stuff about like maternity and just like death that's like upsetting. So yeah, like it's a mixed bag, but I think I did give it 4 stars because I was like, this was so gay. And I did, yeah, enjoy it in that respect, and it was very quick to read, which was also good. The next book is this book, which is The Story of a Modern Woman by Ella Hepworth Dixon, which was serialized in the Ladies Pictorial. However, the information given about that serialization is absolutely nothing, so it's really difficult. Like, I really wanted to understand like anything about like the position that the story would take up in this periodical. But like in the introduction, they don't talk about it at all. They don't even like consider serialization as part of the form of the novel, which like it foundationally was. This is what really confused me. Even in the chronology of the book, it doesn't even include when it was serialized from and to. It just says when the novel was published. Like it just gives one singular month, and I think it must have been serialized over longer than a month. So clearly that's when it was published in like a coagulated form, yeah, in 1894. So it's just like exceptionally annoying. Like if you're gonna sell this, especially like this is literally in the first line, it says it was like it appeared in serial form in the Women's Weekly. So that it was annoying. But aside from that, I found this to be like a surprisingly well written book actually. Especially the beginning, I thought it was really, yeah, there was something very, I don't know, maybe like intelligent or like careful about its prose style. Which I feel like maybe it lost a little bit as it went on, but that was more just because I was like more involved in the story, so I think I paid a bit less attention to the prose style. I think this woman I think this novel is really interesting from a political perspective, from a women's perspective. I think, you know, even more so than Amy Furness, Scholar, this was not written by a socialist woman, so even more so there are working class women, especially working class mothers, who are like represented as like not really having agency and as being like a medium through which middle class women can grow or can learn about life or can become disillusioned with the world. So that feels bad and also can feel quite frustrating and surface level, especially in a novel where you do feel like the writer clearly has the capacity to create character in a way that is like that does have depth. Whereas like then these women are often so surface level, it like brings you out of the story because you're like, well, you can grant so much like interiority and whatever to these other people, including like mean and cruel people. It seems like unfair that you can't give that generosity and that, yeah, complication of humanity to these other characters just because they're like working class and working class women. I think in my review I wrote like it was really well written but also kind of a nightmare. Which I think is true. I think the way that this kind of thinks about gender relations is like a bit of a nightmare, and what it sort of seems to be aiming for a little bit is like very doom filled. Or at least like it's clearly, I wouldn't even say it's ambivalent. I think it's quite negative and pessimistic, especially from the ending, but also just like the whole way through it's pretty pessimistic, which is fair. Like that's, I'm not like against pessimistic interpretations and considerations of especially like heterosexual dynamics, because heterosexuality is pretty rough. I haven't told you what this is about at all, sorry, I just got annoyed about the lack of periodical consideration. This is the story of a woman who is whose dad dies, and like right at the beginning, I mean we get her childhood but like her dad dies, and like she then has to work like to figure out how to continue to live and look after her brother. So she tries to become an artist first, and then there's stuff that happens with that, and then ultimately she more so has success writing. But she also is like fatigued and physically changed by work, you know, in the circles that she frequents and like the class position that she grew up in. Like working isn't seen as especially good for women and like isn't what they're supposed to do, and is like a bit unladylike, and so she has like a bit of difficulty with that. But at the same time, like she needs to support herself, and also she isn't married, and she could get married but like it's not gonna be immediate and it's not gonna solve her problems like right from the beginning. So it's about that and what she does. Yeah, I think the like nightmare feeling is just how it feels like it's always tending on a downward path. Yeah, I don't know, I thought that was interesting. And in the introduction, I think, which is pretty bad, don't read it, but I did find it interesting that apparently Ella Hepworth-Dixon said, maybe I can find it, that she wanted the keynote of the book as her plea for a kind of moral and social trades unionism among women. Obviously, I found that interesting to use a sort of metaphor of trade unionism, because this is not a genuine idea of a trade unionist movement for women. But I did think that was really interesting, especially in this context, because obviously trade unionism is like growing and has been growing for the author in the past like 10 years. So it's obviously on her mind, and thinking about, and also I mean women were like majorly shut out a lot of trade unions, so it makes sense to be thinking about what a women's trade union would look like and what kind of movement that would be. But obviously it's not as like, it is much more of a metaphorical kind of way to describe this work and what she is imagining and trying to get women to take away from this. I kind of do wish I could like focus on this and write about it, but it just doesn't fit enough into my parameters that I sort of needed to, because otherwise I would just be able to write about like anything, which would be great but also deeply overwhelming. I feel like there probably are some more things I want to say about it, but I can't think of any right now. I think also another thing that kind of is like a major differing thing between like Amy Furness Scholar and books like this is their reliance on charity and charitability as a kind of like successful through line to save things, and yeah, philanthropy, that kind of thing. And I think that's often where things go wrong, but like from my own political perspective, but just like also in general, I think it is like a major indicator of like whether the author is more or less directly engaging with like the class system in a way that like I think is more accurate, and also just like self-aware, I guess, too. Anyway, then I had another break and I read 2 comics, just like 2 issues of the same comic, Helen of Windhorn, yes, by Tom King, Clayton Cowles, Bilquis Everly and Matthias Lopes. I was in a comic book shop like a long time ago and I saw the cover of the 2nd issue, which I will put up, and I loved it. I thought it looked so cool, so I took a photo and then I was like, I'm gonna like figure out what that is and see if I'm interested, because also it was the 2nd issue, so I was like, well, I've missed the first one, so I kind of forgot about it. And then recently when I was like looking for like Halloween-y, gothic, kind of the October vibe that I wanted to find, I remembered it and then I was like, oh, I should see if I can read that. So then I did read it, or like I read the 1st and the 2nd issue, like I said. I think there's 3 more issues which I could read, but to be honest I didn't find it like as what I was looking for, and as like I think like really I was looking for a particular like vibe or energy, not necessarily about plot or setting or anything like that, but I wanted particular energy and it just like didn't get through to me. But I did find it interesting enough to read the 2nd edition like issue. But yeah, so this is about like a governess who shows up to help with this particular girl called Helen, whose father has just died, and she goes to pick her up and takes her back to her grandfather's house. She's 16, Helen is. I think that's also the other thing, is from the cover of the 2nd one I actually imagined, obviously this is all me, where I'm like, oh, I bet this story is great and it's about this thing, and then when it's not I'm like, hey. But I just imagined that it would maybe be a little bit more like academic, from the vibe of the cover, and also that the main character would be older than 16. Like I don't know why people always need to be teenagers, and I also just, I'm not that interested in reading about teenagers, so sometimes I just struggle with that because I feel like they're everywhere, which is fine. But yeah, I just think like sometimes it's kind of sad to me because I feel like we only are allowed to tell stories about like coming of age or understanding ourselves or like stepping into a new light and whatever, like if it's about a teenager. But like those things happen to people as they grow up. In fact, like you're constantly coming to understand yourself, and maybe like I understand not everybody will feel like that. I feel like I have a particular relationship to growing up that like also made me feel like this, where I only started living when I turned 20 basically, so it didn't like capture me like I thought it would, and I also felt like the mystery like wasn't as compelling. I think that's really it. I wanted to be like hooked into the mystery more, and I'm not, like I don't care that much, although now I'm thinking more about it I'm like could be good to read the 3rd one. I don't know, we'll see. I might read the 3rd one in November, but who knows. Then it took me a really long time to finish another book, but I did finally finish The Story of an African Farm by Olive Schreiner. One of my favourite like zines, I think it was Power Makes Us Sick, they like released this sort of community health accountability sheet, and on it said something like, we can't be articulate all the time, and ever since I read that, literally like 7 years ago now, it makes me like so comforted. And I tell myself that often because I feel like I'm so inarticulate, but I do feel like I'm not going to be very articulate with this, but there is kind of like a lot I want to say, but I don't know if I'm like in the mood to like chat loads, so we'll see. But yeah, so this is The Story of an African Farm. It's from the 1880s. It's by a white South African author, a white woman South African author. Where to begin? I think like, so the framing of this novel is, so on the back, for example, This really annoyed me too, that like it calls her a new woman, and it's just like, and also a new man. It's just like so annoying. Anyway, this is how it describes one of the main characters in this. Lyndall, Shriner's articulate young South African feminist, blah blah blah. Yeah, well, basically don't read the back of this because it tells you everything that happens pretty much. So yeah, Lyndall is one of the main characters, and then I would say the other main character is this character called Waldo, who is a German. He's the son of this like farmer, or like overseer at the same farm that Lyndall grows up at, and the farm is owned by a Boer woman, so like someone who's like Dutch and has like come to South Africa, and she's called Tant Sannie, and yeah, like she married Lyndall's cousin's dad, and then that dad passed away, and so Lyndall and M, which is the cousin's name, they like grow up on this farm, and then so does Waldo, and I think Waldo is maybe like 2 years older than Lyndall, but I got a bit confused about the timing, but I think she's pretty young for like the majority of this. I guess the reason why I struggle with this to like, or like I wanted to be careful about how I articulate this, is because I don't want people to like misunderstand me or think I'm yeah, like whatever. So hopefully people will understand me. But basically I have this like hesitancy or block, more than a hesitancy really, like a disagreement with the idea that you can just like sort of very easily call this novel a feminist novel. And the reason for that is that like obviously like it's a product of its time, blah blah, but also like the struggle for people's like dignity and the struggle against colonization, for example, was also happening all the time. So I don't think that's always like a great way to say, but obviously in terms of the language used, I guess is maybe more where it makes sense, just in terms of like developing forms, developing ethics and practices of like particular language use and like what is considered appropriate and not. That being said, like there's a lot of language that is racist in this. Like the language that is used, I would say, is not necessarily, I mean, maybe there's a couple characters where you think that Shriner is maybe making them say something as a way to like demonstrate the wrongness and how that's bad. But yeah, I think it's very uncomfortable, and I think like if you don't want to read from the perspective of this white woman, I think that would be fair enough, because like it's very clear from her writing about the African people around and the way that she like categorizes them, that yeah, she is like being racist. Does that make sense? The other thing that I actually did struggle with, and like I do want to read the introduction, which is why my bookmark is still in it, to see if it says anything more about that, is because it's all through this like white lens. I found it hard to figure out like what exactly is meant by some of the racial terms that are being used. There's clearly a kind of hierarchy, and the hierarchy is that like sort of English, European, like Anglo, whatever, like they're at the top. Then we've got like Boer people, so Dutch colonizers. Then below them we have like the people of the land, like the native people. Like yeah, we also don't go into that, and it does focus a lot on Lyndall and Waldo's like spiritual, physical development and education. Basically it's a very sort of religious book, but it's also like a very metaphysical book. I mean, maybe you can tell from the name Waldo, but like there's clearly a transcendentalist strain, because he's named after Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Shriner like loved the transcendentalists. I think this is just going to be like a collection of like thoughts and ramblings, so I hope you can bear with me. But something that really annoyed me about this edition is that there's like a word that's used consistently throughout it, and it is, well, it says in the glossary Dutch and colonial. Where is it? Here we go. The word is, you can't see that, but anyway, the word is kopje. I don't know if that's how you say it. It's Kopje, which means a small hillock or little head, but it's used to mean a hillock most consistently in this, because there's lots of hillocks and people go and sit by the hillock and whatever. And what frustrated me about this edition is that every single time it's used, it's put in like quotation marks, which sort of made it seem so out of the text and so kind of like, I don't know, I felt like it was almost like a microcosm of the way that the setting and the land itself and the people who are like native to the land were like treated in the text, which is to say that they were seen as like aside and like separate and like othered in such like a sort of linguistic way. And I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, it was just sort of every single time, and I just was like, this is a word that sure, like I don't know the meaning of, but like it's a word that is consistently used in the the world of this novel. And obviously it's like a Dutch and colonial world, so it's used by the colonizers too. I don't mean that it's like a neutral world in that sense, but even so, I just felt like it was really weird. And so like Tant Sani, for example, she is like fat, and there's a lot of fat phobia about her, and she's she's represented very like as like a really cruel and horrible person, which like I guess I do care about the fat phobia, but like she is like a colonizer. I'm not trying to defend her. I think she sucks. But she's also contrasted, I think, where it like obviously falls down as some kind of critique aside from the fat phobia, is that it's contrasted with the like purity and the whiteness and the European Englishness of, which obviously Shriner wasn't, but anyway, like of Lyndall, and yeah, to a lesser degree Waldo, because he's kind of is seen as a bit of like a savage weirdo, but more so with Lyndall, she is this like pure angel, and like a lot of that has to do with her proximity to Englishness. Yeah, anyway, I went off. Okay, and then yeah, to return a bit to this like calling it a feminist novel or or calling the characters feminist, I guess also the reason why I have like some ambivalence about this, because part of me is like, in a book where any feminist sentiment about the position and experience of all women is so like attenuated by the complete lack of compassion, care, like even just attention on the experiences of Black women and African women, like how can we really say that that's feminist if it's just using white womanhood as the default position anyway? So it just doesn't, like, it's not a feminist statement. But then part of me then is also like, well, maybe we have to accept that feminism in this form, I don't mean just like the concept that women are equal and deserve like care and respect and autonomy, but like as sort of like a developing political position and philosophy, maybe feminism is a European like white concept, and like it can't be retrofitted to be inclusive. And so maybe we should use different words, or maybe we should stop saying it. I don't really agree with that, but I guess I have a sympathy for that position, because it's just so clear, like it's so clear in this book. And then I also feel like there's such a complicity with the way that people then describe this as some kind of feminist book, because it feels like, well, clearly you just think that, yeah, it doesn't matter that these like other women are considered so outside of the realm of womanhood. Yeah, and then obviously, I mean, like, you know, there is like a reason why, for example, like womanism as a like Black feminist, Black woman centered politics was created, and part of that was out of like feminists' whiteness. Obviously that's a very different time frame for development, so this is all much more like nascent. But yeah, I don't know, like, have any of you read this? I feel like most people haven't. It's not a very fun novel. I think I was really fascinated by it, I guess, at points, although there are some bits that are just very long and go on and are very much about like sort of spiritual angst and reckoning with the like material and the non-material world and belief. But yeah, I will say I'm very interested in the like trans dimensions of this novel. I think it has like, I kind of want to write a trans interpretation of this novel, is basically what I'm saying, because I found that very interesting. I did think it was going to be more in line with some of the things that I was imagining from what I've read about it, which is to say, like, I thought it would be a bit more like anti-work than it is, because yeah, like I said, of how people talked about it, and also because one of the main things happens like pretty far away, like out of the novel's I want to say like off screen, but you know, like one of the characters goes away and then this stuff happens, and then we see the aftermath of what happened, but we don't see the during time. And because I thought we did get to see the during time, that also changed. Like, sorry, I'm trying not to spoil it, which is why I said it like that, but yeah, I don't know. I do think that like this book is very clearly like socialist, and it fits within the socialist writing, like not just fiction but writing network, and there is this, again, this emphasis on education and reading, a bit like with Amy Furness Scholar. It's not as like Christian directly, it is very like religious, and it does like, but that's because it has like a critique of Christianity within it, especially through Waldo. I mean, what is also interesting, and it did make me think a little bit about Wuthering Heights actually, with like Kathy and Heathcliff as being two aspects of the same soul, but one a like man slash boy and one a girl slash woman, with Lyndall and Waldo, because they are clearly very connected and very similar, but yeah, one of them has to live life as a girl slash woman and the other doesn't. Obviously there's lots of things that also make them different, but the way that they are kind of connected and like imbricated with each other I thought was really interesting in terms of Wuthering Heights, I guess. But I guess that's why this is interesting in terms of like a trans reading, not in terms of Waldo, but another character. Okay, I think I've like talked enough about this, but yeah, I hope I made some semblance of sense. Like I said, if you've read this, let me know. And also if you've read any good like stuff that engages with this, I'd really love to read it, especially from maybe like a South African perspective, or especially like a Black South African perspective. I'd be really interested, because obviously like Olive Schreiner is like a Victorian author because she lived in the UK I think for like 10 years or something, and this was when like this came out, and she was also writing a lot during that time too. Kind of, I guess I'm asking the question of like, is she important to South African literary history? Like, is she considered a tool in like South African like feminist politics? Like, I sort of imagine no. But maybe she is, and if so, I'd be interested. Yeah, I do think that some of the like socialist stuff of her politics and her like leftism is erased. Like I said in the Victorian socialist fiction video, like I do feel like the New Woman figure like obfuscates a lot of like other dimensions of text, and I think this happens with this, where this is seen as like, oh, it's about New Women. So I do think that like socialist readings of this are then like elided, and also the importance of Olive Schreiner's writing to socialists, specifically in the UK, that's where I know about, is also like kind of erased when she was actually very important in that respect. Okay, I'm finally done with that one. Okay, and then the final thing that I finished was Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. I did actually finish this yesterday on the 1st of November, but I'm including it in my wrap up because I want to, and also I read the majority of this in October. I guess I actually did start it in September, but I think on like the final day of September, so again, it's mostly an October reading. I hope this is still okay, like I'm in a bit of pain, so I'm sitting in a slightly different position. I was looking at this book, Shirley. Okay, so this, yeah, is the story of like a place in Yorkshire in 1812, mostly, and it's a place where there's like mills. There's a specific mill owner called Robert Moore, who is Belgian and also English, and so he is there, and yeah, there's just sort of like groups of people and key people that we meet. It's funny that like the book is called Shirley because I feel like she's not the only main character. I think actually Caroline is maybe more of a main character, but yeah, anyway, I'll get more into that I guess as I go. I think in my TBR video where I talked about this, I said I wasn't sure if it was about the Luddites or not. It is about the Luddites. It doesn't centre like the Luddites at all, but 1812 is when there was like Luddite uprisings, and in the textile trade, Luddites were like smashing frames and things like that because the technological advancements was leading to them losing jobs and work, and they obviously needed to work, and so there was a lot of like antagonism between mill owners and workers. I mean, there obviously always is, but in this case it was like exacerbated. And then also because of the Napoleonic Wars, I guess, stuff was also exacerbated for the mill owners because they couldn't trade like how they wanted to because of like various parts of Europe being like shut off, and I guess because of like Britain being at war with France. I don't really know about that part, and also like it's not like super focused on, but it is just like a context that is impacting what's going on. So yeah, and then like the two main characters I would say are Caroline Halston, who is the daughter of like a rector and also cousin to Robert Moore. I'm hoping that they're using cousin in the more like older version where it's like not about being like necessarily like a super close blood relation. I think it's clear that they aren't a super close blood relation, but anyway, and the other main character is a woman called Shirley, who's a little bit older than Caroline. She's like 21, I think, so she's in like her majority. She's also like an orphan, I think, and so she has she's very wealthy, and she has like a lot of control because she didn't get married, and now she is in control of herself. Like she's not beholden to like a family or whatever because she's come into her inheritance and money, and so yeah, Shirley Kielder is her name. So yeah, and yeah, so Caroline and Shirley, like, they strike up a friendship. It's a pretty gay friendship, if you ask me, which obviously I would say. And I think there's some, like, interesting gender stuff going, obviously. That's what I'm most interested in, I guess. Specifically in terms of Shirley, she's quite gender non-conforming, like I said, in terms of her position, definitely. But also, she refers to herself occasionally as a man. Like, she has this sort of fantasy where she's, like, a captain or, like, a man, and people, like, participate in it too. And she's like, oh, Captain Kielder, blah, 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 which I thought was very interesting. And she is like a beautiful woman, but she's also described in quite a masculine way, so like that she's handsome. And I think even directly she's described as masculine at one point, but not in a way where you're supposed to think, oh, she's like ugly or whatever. And there's even like a character who's like a spinster called Miss Man, who is like kind of bad, but like none of it is like cartoonish like that. But yeah, I don't know, I did think quite a lot, I guess, maybe because of the setting, about like Jane Austen whilst I was reading this. I know that Charlotte Bronte did not like Jane Austen, yeah, but I think perhaps this was like sort of writing against some of like Jane Austen stuff, including like writing about the Napoleonic Wars, and I felt like maybe Mansfield Park was the kind of link there, but I don't know, this was all whatever. I decided I couldn't give this 5 stars because I just didn't enjoy it like enough to. And I definitely think that like the class politics are my enemy. But I did ultimately really enjoy this. I think it's really wonderfully written as usual. I think the characters are very like deep and complicated, and yeah, I did really enjoy it ultimately. Yeah, I think it's even very explicit about its kind of delight in capitalism, even as it kind of criticizes it, and a bit like how we were saying with like philanthropy as like a theme, which you can kind of tell where somebody like that, where the author stands politically by how it's employed or like represented in a novel. Well, that comes very much into play with this, I think, like very much so. And even the way it ends, like right at the very end, like literally final 2 paragraphs, demonstrates a kind of acceptance of the destruction of nature that capitalism wrought. Is that the right form of the word? Anyway, and yeah, just like an acceptance of that as like the path to progress, which I guess you would expect from a book that does take mostly, although it is sympathetic, but mostly the side of people who were, you know, using new technology and making it very difficult for workers to work and to have bread and to not die from starvation and to care for their families, blah blah. You know, yeah, like the book that takes the sides of those mill owners instead of the Luddites and just like the other workers. I really love this painting. It's not quite from the right era, it's from 1825 apparently, but I like it a lot. Yeah, is there anything else I want to say? I realised I forgot to say something about Shelley that I wanted to, which was about how Charlotte like kind of tries to create relationships between men and women in a way that like somewhat equalizes them, which is sort of interesting, especially in terms of Shelley, but also how, because she's so committed to like a kind of sadomasochism or a sort of like very intensive subservience, there is this like very interesting tension in those relationships. And you know, there's a sort of, yeah, like a submissive position that is like these women are supposed to be in, whilst also perhaps like a way to kind of try to materially create equality or parity between the two people in a relationship. I don't know if that made sense. I also was trying not to spoil what happened, so I can't talk about it super in depth, but yeah. Should we look up and see if I successfully did all of the prompts for victober? I don't think I completed one of the challenges and I didn't participate in the group reads, but I think actually with these 3, well, and Amy Furness, so with these 4 I think I can cover most of the prompts, because one was to read a serialized thing, so that was this one. Another was to read something that engaged with religion, and I would say that honestly, maybe not The Story of a Modern Woman, but Amy Furness Scholar, The Story of an African Farm and Shelley all engage in religion in quite like an intense way. I think Amy Furness Scholar probably the most, and in the way that most interested me, but The Story of an African Farm is also quite, yeah, religious, like I was saying. The only one that I missed was to experience Victorian drama in some way, which is a shame. I watched this really excellent video by Roz, whose challenge that is, which I'll link below, about like women in Victorian theatre, and there's definitely a bunch of places I really want to like check out from watching that video, so like maybe at some point I will. I'm really happy with everything I read during Victober. I feel like I got what I wanted to read, and I mostly enjoyed quite a lot of it, and it was like useful and fascinating at points, and so yeah, like happy to have done that. So that was great. It's probably one of my most successful Victobers, to be honest, because I like literally read every book that I like put on my TBR and another one, so genius. Look who's able to read what they say they're gonna read. Those are all the things that I read. Let me know if you've read any of them, and if you did, like what you think, or if you're interested in picking them up. I hope you have a good day when you're watching this, and I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye!